Tonight's message, the first message, by the way, we have one at 7 o'clock, and then we're going to take about a 5-minute intermission, and then we're going to come back for our second meeting. Tonight's message, the first one, Prophecies, Hijack, Heist. Anybody here ever been to Independence Hall? If you haven't been there, you need to take the time to go over there at some point. There is a lot there. It's about a stone's throw away from the Liberty Bell. Of course, now it's the symbol for Pennsylvania on the new license plates, if you haven't seen that. Symbol of America. And in Independence Hall, you can actually go right in there where they developed and debated and passed the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. It's something to be able to go there and stand where some of the most important documents that have ever been penned and signed were written there. And here is a passage from the Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Without doubt, this is the oldest written and codified national constitution in existence. This really is a special document. And really this represents a unique, should we call it an experiment? In a sense it was. This place where we can have the freedom to elect our own leader and have the freedom to worship according to the dictates of our own conscience. And what would it take to amend something like this? And actually, when our forefathers developed this, they realized that there would need to be some adjustments likely made over time. So they actually made provision for that. And one of the amendments is, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. And this is, I think, the very same year there was another amendment that was made, and this is one that's talked about a lot here lately in the past number of years. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So there were certainly some things that they looked back and realized maybe there's some room for adjustment here. I wonder if we did a test here on the amendments, how many people would pass that test? Anybody know how many amendments there were? 27 amendments. And here's one. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes. That's one we all know painfully well. Whether we're happy about that or not, it's a fact now. From whatever source derived, without apportionment among the several states, and without regard to any census or enumeration. And in 1920, you know what the 19th Amendment is? It gave the right to women. It gave the right to women to have the right to vote. So good things that have been adapted out of this. In 1967, the 25th Amendment was passed, and this gave power for the vice president to become president should the active president die while in office. And you'll notice the date there, 1967. What happened just 4 years earlier? Assassination of Kennedy. So they began to need really make some provisions for this. And so what would it take to amend it? This is what it takes to amend. Amendments may be proposed either by the Congress through a joint resolution passed by a 2/3 vote, or by a convention called by Congress in response to applications from 2/3 of the state legislatures. So it's not an easy thing to make happen. And there was actually another amendment that was passed, and I think it was the newest one. It was in 1991. and that made it so people in Congress cannot vote themselves pay raises while they're in that term. So they can vote the pay raise, but it's not in effect until the next term. So that one they wrestled over for a long time. And I think since the 1700s, actually, I think they were working on that one. So the amendments, it's not like somebody just wakes up one day and decides to change it and everybody goes along with it. We go to Colossians chapter 2, verse 14. And you might wonder, what would it take to change or amend God's commandment? We go to Colossians 2:14, blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to his cross. Now this was a major thing. I would say the most important thing in the history of the universe, not even just planet Earth, the universe, the death of Christ on the cross. And when he went to the cross, there were some things that were changed. And we talked about this last night. We touched on it a bit last weekend too. But what changed when Christ went to the cross? And what actually was nailed to the cross? And actually, I already asked you this before. You tell me, what literally was nailed to the cross? Jesus. Jesus was nailed to the cross. So this was significant because he was paying the penalty for our sins, and this signified the end of the sacrificial and ceremonial system. So the feast days, no longer valid, no longer required. The sacrifices, no longer valid, no longer required, because Jesus fulfilled that. And we see this in Mark chapter 15, verse 38. The Bible says the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. We studied this last night. So if this is your first time joining us, I'll try to catch you up a bit. God instituted the sanctuary. There was a sanctuary in heaven, and there was a sanctuary on earth. The earthly sanctuary was a scale model of the sanctuary that was in heaven. In the earthly sanctuary, there were two compartments, a holy place and the most holy place. Every day of the year, the priest would come into the holy place. They would do a work of intercession. One day a year, the high priest would go into the most holy place. That's where the Ark of the Covenant is, the Ten Commandments, and even the presence of God. One day a year, he would go into the most holy place and do a work of cleansing the sanctuary of sin, symbolic, obviously. And all the people in the camp of Israel had to have their sins confessed and forsaken by that point. This was a big deal. So when Jesus died on the cross, the veil in the temple, the veil that separated the holy place from the most holy place, was torn in two from top to bottom. Last night I told you how thick it was. Anybody remember how thick the veil was? Thickness of a man's hand. Yeah. So this was a massive thing, not easy to tear. This was obvious to anybody that this was divinity that tore this. And this took, I've seen reports that say, it's not in the Bible, you have to go by some Jewish tradition. Some say it took 20 men to change this every year. And others say, I was just reading more recent resources, they're wondering if it didn't take 300 people to change it, to take it down and do repairs and everything and put it back up, and to make sure it's just right for God. So with that much, this was a big deal. So being torn in two, top to bottom, significant, major thing, indicated the end of the sacrificial and ceremonial system. And we should be thankful for that today. This is why we don't have to drag sheep down to church and sacrifice. This is why we don't bring turtle doves and all of those other sacrificial animals. Jesus was that sacrifice. In fact, some people wonder, how do we relate the ceremonial law with the moral law? Last night we saw and discovered that there are two different laws. Actually, there's various laws in the Bible, two main laws. There's the laws that deal with sacrifices and ceremonies, and there's the moral Ten Commandment law. It's the moral Ten Commandment law that was engraved by God in stone, shouted from a mountaintop, consecrated by blood. This was significant. So we went over this last weekend. So I'll just do a review just to catch up. We're going to run through the Ten Commandments here. Commandment number 1, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And we saw that actually technically that's only part of the first commandment, because the first commandment starts out with, I am the Lord thy God which brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. That's key because there are some that wonder if, the law is oppressive. It brings burden. And God starts the whole thing off by saying this thing brings freedom, not burden. So there's a command against having other gods. Commandment number 2, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them nor serve them. We've seen that each one of these laws has the literal application and a spiritual application. And we see that bowing down to graven images, bowing down to idols, could be more than just carving something out and bowing down to it. Could money be an idol to us? Could people, could work be an idol to us? And this is something that God was trying to convey to us. What demands more of our attention and time than God? The third commandment, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. We talked about this last time. And when we call ourselves Christian, not acting like one, and we take on Christ's name, we become Christian, we become Christ-like. God's name was considered very, very holy. And even as they translated the Bible, let me give you a little history lesson here. When they were translating the Bible, recognize they only had, it came from 3 languages, but they were going from many thousands of different manuscripts, compiling it, and then translating it to a compiled work, the Bible that we have today. So when, in particular during the Dark Ages, they had a room that was designed just for this. It was called a scriptorium. The scriptorium was round, and it had windows all around. And this was designed so they could have natural light as long as possible all day long. Because when you're translating the Bible, you could not chance a flame in there. Something obviously go horribly wrong. So no flame for heat. So they worked through the winter too. So you can imagine what they went through for this. Can't chance it. Anyway, so as they're translating and they're copying the scriptures, very, 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 very careful. So they would count the lines, the words, 1, 2, 3, 4 words to the center. Yep, 1, 2, 3, 4. The letters match up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yep, matches up, matches up. And you wanted to be very careful because no delete button, no copy and paste. And if you mess up, you ball up, throw it, and start all over again. When they translated God's name, they would be doing the work. They'd get to God's name. They would stop, set the pen down, pray, pick up a special pen, write God's name, stop, put that pen down, pray, pick up their other pen, and continue the work. God's name is considered sacred and holy. Today we just kind of throw it around like it's just some kind of common thing, but God's name is a sacred and holy thing, and we ought to give him the respect that he deserves. Exodus chapter 28. We go to the 4th commandment, all about spending time with God. We took an entire presentation last night about this and looked into it, and tonight we're going to expand on that. I told you tonight would be a part 2 to last night's part 1. And Exodus chapter 20, verse 12, the 5th commandment, honor your father and mother. Imagine a world where children respected their parents. What a world. Imagine a world where nobody killed each other. Imagine a world where you turn on the news and people aren't shooting each other all the time. Isn't it sad that we actually needed to be commanded, don't kill? You think it'd be a natural thing, and it is, but we've learned to kind of turn off that switch. Exodus 20, verse 14, thou shalt not commit adultery. Obviously, that's a pretty good commandment. And Exodus chapter 20, verse 15, thou shalt not steal. Exodus 20, verse 16, you shall not bear false witness. You should not lie. Exodus 20, 17, you shall not covet. So we've looked at all of these. We've expanded on them. So it makes sense that if God held to such a high regard and standard his law, that there would come an entity that would want to attack it. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 3 through 4. This is Paul's letter, second letter to the church in Thessalonica. That's what Thessalonian means. It was to the church in Thessalonica. It says this, let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come. Day, notice that's capitalized. This is talking about the return of Jesus. That day will not come unless the falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition. Now, you'll find this name, this phrase given out several different ways and times, but it's all the same thing. Man of sin, same thing as the Antichrist power. Same thing. This is what he's talking about. Notice it's called the man of sin. It's not called the man of craftiness. It's not called the man of deceit. It's not called the man of lying. It's interesting that, inspired by the Spirit of God, the prophet wrote and said that it is the man of sin, the son of perdition. Now let me ask you again, we've reviewed this already. What is the definition of sin in the Bible? Anybody remember that? Transgression of the law, violation of God's law. Evidently, at the return of Jesus, then there would be somebody that comes along, and that one of the marks of identifying it would be key with sin, with violation of God's law. And this person opposes him and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worship, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. So we've seen over and over that the whole concept of the Bible is about worship. Jesus deserves worship, the devil wants worship, and therefore at the end time we expect to see a large tactic from the devil would revolve around worship. So last night we focused on this one. So let's just do a bit of review. Some of this will be, so we're going to do the repeat and enlarge. So we're going to repeat some and we're going to expand on what we learned last night. The fourth commandment we saw last night was one that would come under particular attack by the devil. And it says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. A special commandment. This one is right in the center. By the way, did you note that the commandments are broken down into two halves? When Moses came off the mountain, he had 2 tables of stone, right? Why 2 tables of stone? You know, today if you're writing a note on a Post-it note, you write a message and then you run out of room, you got to grab another Post-it note and finish it. Does God run out of room? No. So we see that it is the first 4 commandments deal with our relationship with God. The last 6 commandments deal with our relationship with one another. And this 4th commandment is the one that kind of hinges the two. So let's look at it some more. The 4th commandment, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And I guess, why did God have to give the Sabbath to humanity? Why something like that? It's the only commandment that doesn't have a thou shalt or thou shalt not, yet it's also the only commandment that begins with the word remember, the one that we would likely forget. The Sabbath is about rest. Do you ever get tired? You're running around all the time. You know, we have so many different inventions now of what helps us to save time. And it seems like we just fill that time up with other things. Let's take the microwave, for example. The microwave. And, we can't even wait for food to cook in the oven anymore. So we put it in this, box that's going to get shot with radiation or with waves or whatever. I'm not an engineer. You guys know what I'm talking about, though. We're so lazy, we won't even press the numbers on the microwave anymore. 1 minute. We used to, in the old days, 100 start. And then, you know how I know you do it? Because I do it too. You put the food in, 3, add 30 seconds till you get the number that you want. So we've taken all of this that has brought us convenience, and then we've filled it with other stuff. And obviously it hasn't worked because we're no less tired than we used to be. We keep searching for other things to bring us rest, and we haven't found that thing that brings us rest yet. But God has had it here the whole time. We have families running around like chickens with their heads cut off all week long, going all to this event and this club and that thing, and it's a busy life. And so God had to command us, it's kind of a strange thing, had to command us to stop and to come and spend time together. And that's what the Sabbath is. God knew that we would need time as families to come back together. There's 2 things that the devil has been attacking since creation. You know what that is? Number 1 is time with God, and number 2, time with family. Those 2 institutions he has been attacking since creation. And if God's people had observed the Sabbath from the beginning, there would be far fewer broken homes. There would be no such thing as evolution, be focused on God as creator. We'd be connected with God. And it's easy to get so sidetracked and busy. So if the devil's working on us so hard to get us so busy and worn out, we've got to be extra intentional to go that much closer and spend that much more time with God. And he gave it to us as a memorial of creation. Not only that he created this world in the first place, but that he can recreate our hearts. So it makes good sense if you were the devil and you wanted to break down the family relationship and you wanted to break people's relationship with their God, it makes good sense that you would attack the Ten Commandments. Shouldn't surprise us, and in particular that he would attack that fourth commandment. You know, you go down the street and you go to one church and you could talk about the fifth commandment, you honor your father and mother, and everybody would say amen. You go to another church down the street and you can talk about murder and everybody would say, amen, murder's bad. You go to another church down the street and you talk about adultery. It might be quiet, but they'd agree. But you talk about the Sabbath and people get weird. You know, God has given us this universe. And of all of the vastness of the universe, He's actually set aside this time for us that he spends just with us. So what would it take to actually change a commandment of God? This would be monumental. This would be what's bigger than monumental? This would be huge. This would be colossal. Colossal, that's a good word. So if we would expect to find a change in the commandments, you know, most of the Christian world today generally goes to worship on what day? Sunday, and we've seen in the Bible, if we want to stick with the Bible, and I think we're safest if we stick with that, what day did God set aside as the day of worship? Saturday, or the Bible calls it the Sabbath. So if there was going to be a shift, we should expect to see something magnificent, something clear in the Bible. You know, Jesus was accused of things during his ministry. He was accused of violating the Sabbath. Did you realize that? You know what's interesting? He was a carpenter by trade, so you'll find him healing on the Sabbath, but you'll never find him in the carpenter's shop. So interesting. He said it's lawful to do good on the Sabbath. So he would go out and do good to people, and he would heal, and they attacked him. They wanted to kill him because of this. So imagine this. If there was an entire movement rising up not long after the resurrection of Jesus that was telling people that the Sabbath had actually been changed from the seventh day to the first day, this would be colossal. Actually, it would incite civil war. And we would expect to see some kind of massive war about this. But let's study it a little bit further. The Bible's pretty clear on this subject. And, you know, a lot of people are very enthusiastic about it, but not everybody is. And in fact, you can go to some churches today and they tell you the law's been done away with altogether. Can you believe such a thing? And, you know, I just can't imagine any pastor standing up front saying, husbands, you go ahead and cheat on your wives tonight. The law's been done away with. I just can't imagine any pastor standing up front saying, it's okay to steal from your neighbor. The law's been done away with. When the accusation goes out that the law's been done away with, really what's at the heart of that is the one I have a problem with has been done away with. But let's continue to study it out. The Sabbath is mentioned many times in the New Testament, and Sunday, it's actually hardly mentioned at all. Now, let me be clear on this. It's actually not mentioned at all because you don't find the words Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday in the Bible. It's not there. We got those names after Roman gods came after the Bible was already written and compiled. So remember, in the Bible, you'll find first day, second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, preparation day, and Sabbath. So you'll find Sabbath mentioned many times, but you will find first day mentioned a few times. So we need to look at that. There are 8 places, and 8 places only in the New Testament that the first day is mentioned. 5 of them are basically saying the same thing. That's what you see up here on the screen. 5 of them are basically saying that's when the women went to, that's the day that Jesus rose was on the first day. And by the way, this is going to be in your notes on the way out. So there are three that we need to look at a little more closely. Let's go to John chapter 20, verse 19. So when it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, what day is it? First day. And when the doors were shut where the disciples were, for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood in the midst and said to them, "Peace be with you." So why were the apostles, the disciples assembled there? They weren't there to worship. They were there because, first of all, they didn't even believe the resurrection took place. They were assembled there because the master that they had been following for 3.5 years was just hung on the cross and died, and they were wondering, am I going to be next? They're not gathered here for worship at all. They're gathered here because they're hiding. Let's go to the seventh place that it talks about the first day. 1 Corinthians 16, verses 1 and 2. Now concerning the collection, this is Paul writing this to the church in Corinth. Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I have given orders to the churches of Galatia, so you must do also. On the first day of the week, let each one of you lay something aside, storing up as he may prosper, that there be no collections when I come. So notice that. So some have taken this passage and wondered, well, if they're taking up an offering, does this mean that they're actually worshiping? That must be the transference of the day of worship, of the Sabbath. But that's not what we find. I think that would be a stretch. What was taking place here is this was in a time of famine. And he was calling church members to pull together and help each other out. And what he's saying is on the first day after Sabbath, let's pull resources together. Let's help our brothers and sisters out. And so we don't find anything there about a transference of the day of worship. The next one, he was talking right to the church in Corinth, right? And then in Acts, we see what he was doing in Corinth. After these things, Paul declared from Athens and went to Corinth, and he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and persuaded both Jews and Greeks. So we find that actually it's quite the opposite of transferring the commandment, changing it. The opposite of changing the day of worship, actually what he does is he confirms it. He confirms the establishment of the seventh-day Sabbath. And here we go to the eighth place. This is the eighth and final place that the Bible mentions the first day in the New Testament. Now, on the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul, ready to depart the next day, spoke to them and continued his message until midnight. There were many lamps in the upper room where they were gathered together, and in a window sat a certain young man named Eutychus, who was sinking into a deep sleep. He was overcome by sleep, and as Paul continued speaking, he fell down from the third story and was taken up dead. So what was happening here? This was on the first day, so it's not the Sabbath. So Paul's preaching, and he's going on late, and he's going on and on. You know what the moral of this story is? The moral of the story is don't fall asleep during the pastor's preaching. And of course, you could say, no, the moral of the story is don't preach all night long. Let us get out of here. But I tell you what, if it gets any warmer in here, I'm going to fall asleep up here. It's warm. We need to get the air conditioning going in here, unless it's just me. So what happened here was what? Paul's preaching on that first day. And let's remember this. Let's remember how the Bible reckons the days of the week. The Bible reckons the days of the week from sunset to sunset. So biblically speaking, the Sabbath goes from Friday sunset to Saturday sunset. So what he is doing is they were probably worshiping on the Sabbath, and then after the sun set, it becomes the first day. So what we would call Saturday night after sunset, Saturday night in the first day, biblically speaking, is when he was preaching. And this was going to be the last time he would see them. So he wanted to give them all of the Bible truth, all of the knowledge he had. He wanted to give them everything he could. And it went on. And then the next day, Paul walked a long distance to catch a ship. So actually what we don't find is a transference of the Sabbath at all. What we see is him actually confirming the validity of the Bible Sabbath. Because remember, the Jews, they had come up with all kinds of crazy laws regarding the Sabbath. They actually made it a burden. You couldn't spit on the Sabbath because it might land on a seed, it might germinate, that'd be considered farming, that's no good. You couldn't wipe the mud off of your sandal on the Sabbath, that'd be considered spackling, so you'd get in trouble for that. And you could only walk certain distances also. So Paul, remember, he considers himself a Pharisee of Pharisees. He knew the law and he knew it well, and he would have been very careful to maintain that with his relationship with God. So when he goes on this long walk, that would have been a clear violation. So what we have here is an establishment or a continuing the understanding of the Bible Sabbath. Let's go to Revelation chapter 14, verse 7. Now, in the three angels' messages, we studied this last night a little more in depth. We saw that before Jesus returns, there are three messages that must go to the entire world before Jesus comes back. And in the first message, it says this: worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and the fountains of waters. This is a direct quote from the fourth commandment. It's a call to worship God as creator. It's a call to come back to a genuine worship of God. And this we find in the final book written in the Bible. We saw last night and studied this quite in depth, how Jesus confirmed the validity of the Bible Sabbath in Luke chapter 4. Remember, this was the day that he declared himself Messiah. So he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read. So we see that Jesus, he established the Sabbath at creation, confirmed it at the Mount Sinai with the Ten Commandments written in stone. By the way, the Ten Commandments already existed. Remember, the people were starting to forget these things, so he had to engrave it in stone. Hey, don't ever forget this. So he confirmed it in his life as well. We go to Matthew chapter 24, verse 20. Pray that your flight may not be in the winter or on the Sabbath. So Jesus is looking with his prophetic eye 40 years down into the future, 40 years. We looked at this last night. This is when Rome came in. They ransacked, destroyed Jerusalem again, or the temple in particular, actually. Actually, they set fire to it. And then they realized that all the gold inside melted down in the rocks. So then, confirming Bible prophecy again, tore it brick by brick to try to get the gold out. And Jesus is saying, listen, in the future, 40 years down in the future, you still need to be observing the Sabbath. And they were. What about the winter? If the Romans came in the winter, all the people would be gathered into the town. Any other time of the year, they're out in the fields working. If it happened on the Sabbath, they're all in the sanctuary, all in the synagogue worshiping. So we actually know that not one faithful Christian was harmed during this siege. Why? Because they were still maintaining the Bible Sabbath. They were still following in a loving way, their relationship with God. Acts 5:29. You might still wonder, but man, I thought for sure the apostles changed it. Somebody had to have changed it. Why do so many churches worship on Sunday when the Bible is pretty clear about the seventh day? And here you have Peter. Peter and the other apostles answered and said, we ought to obey God rather than man. So I think that's good counsel. When it comes down to it, ultimately we're faced with a decision. Ultimately, we need to decide what's going to be our authority. Is it going to be the Bible, or is it going to be what this person said? Is it going to be what God said, or is it going to be what a church says? Is it going to be what God said, the Creator, or what a family member says, or someone that I care about says? Let me tell you, Jesus cares about you. He will never, ever lead you astray. But through time, it would require some level of trickery from the devil to do this. Let's bring it down a little bit. Let's look into some optical illusions. And which line do you think is longer here? The horizontal or the vertical? Vertical looks longer, and I actually had to measure it. It's not. The horizontal line is longer. Isn't that weird? It's an optical illusion. Now remember, our brain doesn't actually see. Our eyes see, and then it translates the information to the brain. The brain does the best it can and kind of fills in the missing gaps and pieces. Here's another one that'll mess you up a little bit. This one here, which line do you think is longer, the top one or the bottom one? Yeah, you've seen that one before. They're the same. They're the same. Here's another one. This one's a little more effective if you're up close. And maybe if you can see it from where you are, the closer you get, it looks like it's moving. And I promise you, I'm not trying to hypnotize you, but it's not moving. It's not moving. It's stationary. But the brain plays tricks on us. I'm going to show you one that's going to really get your brain thinking tonight. Some of you are good at puzzles. Some of you like puzzles. I don't, because I just don't. So I had to spend time on this one. A bat and a ball cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Anybody have an idea? How much does the ball cost? How much? 5 cents. There's always one guy. It is 5 cents. I had to stop and really think about this. Like it was my brain, it wasn't putting it together, and I actually, should I put this in, should I not? Because if the ball's 5 cents, then the bat must be $1 more than the ball, $1.05. So the bat and the ball together cost $1.10. Man, I was looking for a bit of a bigger build-up than that. It's all right. All right, so why would somebody want to change the law? Why deceive? Who cares? Why go through such painstaking to try to change something? Why the Sabbath? Why the Sabbath? And is it even possible for anyone to change God's law? Maybe I like some of the law. We've got to be careful not to ask God for a 10% discount off of his law also. Many of us were okay with 90% of the law. We're good with 9 of them, but that other one, we don't need to ask God for a 10% off coupon. Let's leave it, let's follow him the whole way. And here's where it happened. In the 300s, there was a man being raised up by the name of Constantine. This was Emperor Constantine in Rome. And just before he comes on the scene, there was this massive persecution against God's people. I mean, it was persecution like this wasn't just to kind of annoy God. This was an extermination. And for 10 years, it was essentially an attempted extermination of Christians. And then the Roman Emperor Constantine in 313 AD, he pens the Edict of Milan, and it grants religious tolerance. So why did it happen? Constantine, he becomes a Christian nominally. Why do I say nominally? I say nominally because he wasn't even baptized till he was practically on his deathbed. And his rationalization was, well, I'm a man of war. I'm still going to kill people, so I'll wait till I'm almost there myself, then I'll get baptized. That's a dangerous game to play. That's a very dangerous game to play. But so he's got a problem here. So as he's quasi becoming a Christian, so this goes against some of the things that are common in the pagan belief system in Rome. So, it's just like today when some star from Hollywood or something, they do some new fashion or something, everybody else does the same thing. They do some kind of bizarre haircut and everybody wants to do that same thing, whether they think it looks good or not, they do it because a popular person does it. Well, you have a Roman emperor now that becomes a Christian, and so the people want to gravitate over to that, but he has a problem. He has his part of the belief system, but you've got the pagans that worship the sun god on the Sunday. So then he begins to blend the two, and the Edict of Constantine was released in 321 AD. This was the first time that it was actually forced by law that people had to worship on Sunday. And you might wonder, by the way, how many years after the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ? Almost 300 years, right? And it took a law to force people to worship on a day that they weren't accustomed to. So this very fact that there was a law that was there tells us that God's people had been maintaining the seventh-day Bible Sabbath the entire time. And this is what the edict says in 321. On the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrates and people residing in cities rest, and let shops be closed. So there you have it. Everything had to be shut down. This is a teaching book from a church. And it's actually written in question and answer format. And the question is, which day is the Sabbath? Good question. Answer, Saturday is the Sabbath. Good answer. Next question, why do we observe Sunday instead of Saturday? Another good question. Answer, because the Catholic Church transferred the solemnity from Saturday to Sunday. And this is a book, this is from their institution. This is not anything I've written or anybody from my church. So it's interesting that they actually admit, we've changed the law. We've transferred it. This is another book, same institution. Fundamentalists meet for worship on Sunday, yet there's no evidence in the Bible that corporate worship was to be made on Sundays. The Jewish Sabbath, or day of rest, was of course Saturday. I take point on that because it's not the Jewish Sabbath. How do I know that? Jews didn't exist at creation. Jews didn't exist for many, many years yet. They came in late into the game. The Sabbath is given to all people. And I always have to chuckle a little bit when I share this with somebody and they say, oh, that's your Sabbath. I say, me, I can't consecrate a day. It's not my Sabbath. Remember, the fourth commandment calls the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. It's God's Sabbath. Anyway, so this is what their writing is. The Jewish Sabbath, or day of rest, was, of course, Saturday. It was the Catholic Church that decided Sunday should be the day of worship for Christians in honor of the resurrection. Resurrection was a good day. It was an important day. And I tell you, the crucifixion means nothing without the resurrection. It requires Jesus being resurrected from the dead. The whole package is there. However, when Jesus died on the cross, he didn't die on the cross for us to automatically start violating the law. And you would have to expect, if there was going to be some change, that Jesus himself would have had to have instituted it. You know, there's something called a covenant. God made a covenant with his people. Think of it like a last will and testament. Last will and testament. When is the last point you can make changes in your will? Yeah, while you're alive, exactly. It has to happen before you're dead. So if Jesus were going to make a change in the law he created, shouted from a mountaintop, engraved in stone, lived it in his life, taught it to his disciples, looked forward 40 years into the future, and then we saw even last night it goes even beyond the second coming. So if he was going to change something like that, legally he's bound to have had to have made it before he died on the cross. And you can read more about that in Hebrews. Hebrews gives a lot of that legal jargon with that. It's a good study. Here's another one, Cardinal James Gibbons. You may read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, and you will not find a single line authorizing the sanctification of Sunday. The Scriptures enforce the religious observance of Saturday. It's interesting. Now, some may say, well, I do it because it's my tradition. And traditions are good. Some traditions are very good. Thanksgiving, and again, can you believe it's just a few weeks away? Thanksgiving, good tradition. Family comes together, spends time together, probably eats too much together, but it's a good tradition. But a good tradition can become a bad tradition when it contradicts the law of God, when it clearly violates and goes against what God has already written. That becomes a problem. So who is it that made us? You tell me. Who is it that made us? Jesus. Who suffered for us? Who died for us? Who rose for us? And who redeemed us? It was Jesus. So if we just let him be our focus, everything else will go right along to where he would have us to be. You know, we look back through history, and maybe even some acquaintances of ours have affected our worldview. And by the way, in history, it's not like the whole religious world woke up one day and was like, yeah, let's make the Sabbath a different day. It was a long, gradual thing that had to take place. It had to be long and gradual to be able to convince that many to go along with it. So we don't want to do it because of history. We don't want to do it even because of our own acquaintances. Let's follow God. Let's follow God. John 14:15, Jesus said, "If you love me, keep my commandments." And you always flip that. John 15:14 says, "You are my friends if you do whatsoever I command you." Dr. Joyce Brothers wrote this: "The best proof of love is trust." The best proof of love is trust. How do you know your spouse loves you? There has to be trust there. When a spouse goes off to work, how do you know they're faithful to you? There's an element of trust there. Trust is at the base of love. And, think about it with Gideon. He was going up to battle against the Midianites. He started out with 32,000 men. 32,000, and even still, the battle was like, man, I don't know if that's going to happen. 32,000. God said, you know what? That's too many. Let's reduce that a little. Then God said, no what? Still too many. Let's reduce that a little. He was reduced to 300 men. Why would God do something like that to Gideon? Because when Gideon would go in there with 300 men against their many thousands and still have victory, they would have no choice but to see God as the power behind that. And let me tell you, when he was going into the battle with 300 men, there was some trust. There was some faith that went into that. Revelation chapter 14, verse 12, when Jesus comes back, the Bible gives us the character of those that are looking forward to the return of Jesus, and this is one of the points, one of the characteristics. Here is the patience of the saints. We've looked at that. God's people need patience. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. When Jesus comes back, he's looking for people keeping his commandments, not looking for people breaking his commandments. And it's not really a matter of days. The commandment, the day, could be anything, but this is the one that the devil really wanted to launch his attack against. It's not a matter of days. It's a matter of surrender and trust. In the Garden of Eden, the fruit could have been anything. It wasn't about the fruit. It was about, will you trust me when I give you these guidelines? Will you put your faith in me when I tell you, avoid this, but do this? Will you trust me? That's what it's all about. The United States we got ourselves into trouble not long after the War of 1812, just 4 years after, actually. Fort Montgomery was built. It was also known as Fort Blunder. Why? We rebuilt a fort to protect ourselves against the Canadians, if you can imagine such a thing, but we built it on Canadian property. It took a couple years. Somebody was resurveying the land, and how'd you like to be the guy to have to bring that up into the committee meeting? So they studied it, and they said, we messed up. That was a massive, massive mistake. I'd love to know how many people got fired off of that one. We messed up big time. But then they had to go back and correct it. So where they were off base, maybe even ignorantly, once it came to light, they had to make a conscious decision to correct it. There's a town in New Jersey. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. Now it's called Newmarket, New Jersey. It used to be called Quibbletown. This is a colonial hamlet. This is the sign in the actual town. This is a true story. A colonial hamlet which was so named because of dissension as to whether Saturday or Sunday is the Sabbath. Newmarket, 1830. And it wasn't renamed to Newmarket until 1955. And that's because the market kind of shut down and there was a shift in the economy, so they got creative and named it Newmarket. But we don't need to fight. This is not something we need to quibble about. We don't need to change an entire name of a town because we can't decide which. I think if we just agree, let's just follow God. I'm not interested in what this person says or this person. I'm interested in what God says. And I think if we were all just okay with that, there would be far less quibbling. And I think that we would see our lives would be far more enhanced as well. The reality is Jesus is coming back. And we're going to study this, the next subject. We're going to take about a 5-minute break, and we're going to see how will Jesus come? Can we know when he's going to come? All of those specifics. So let's pray, and then we're going to take 5. Father in heaven, we thank you for the information you've given us. And we like studying the Bible. Why does anybody study anything? So we can learn. God, we want to learn how we can trust you better, how we can love you more, how we can follow where you ask us to go. And God, where we may be a little fearful, give us the courage. Where there may be some doubt, help thou our unbelief. Help us to follow you no matter what. In Jesus' name we ask it, amen.